Do you want me to stay on screen for a little bit, Gian, or?
Up to you.
Okay,
I'm
then.
just not sure if okay, I can just get started like now. Or should I wait a few minutes for people to hop on?
I think you're good to go.
Yeah, I
Okay.
would say let's get started.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Gian Smith, and today we're going to be talking about trends in water quality in central New Jersey as reported via our Clean Water Report Card using StreamWatch data. I am our StreamWatch program coordinator here at the Watershed Institute, and we'll talk about that. Before we jump in, there's a few logistics. Just please be aware that we are recording this webinar. We will be sure to send you a recording with the follow-up email, and it will also be available on our website. And we will also provide copies of these slides for you. As we're going through the presentation, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. And of course, thank you for being here today and for participating. So for those of you who are new to us, the Watershed Institute is a nonprofit, environmental nonprofit located in Hopewell, New Jersey, on about 950 acres of preserved land. We have been working to keep water clean, safe, and healthy since 1949, having just celebrated our 75th anniversary last year. Oh, okay. So our mission is keeping water clean, safe, and healthy. We work to protect and restore waters and natural environment in central New Jersey through our four main pillars of conservation, advocacy, science, and education. As a member of the science department, I'm going to be focusing on what we do there. In general, our science department has this kind of overall strategy of collecting data within our watershed. So that's the Millstone watershed and the adjacent Delaware Basin. We then convert that data into actionable information that's used for education as well as advocacy. And then we try to deploy demonstrable strategies to engage the public. I do want to introduce some of the other members of our science department. So in addition to myself as the StreamWatch coordinator, we have Steve Tuorto as our director, and he is joining us here as a panelist today and will be answering Q&As at the end, but also throughout as needed. Erin Stretz is our assistant director, and she will also be joining us to help out with the Q&As should we need her. And finally, Olivia Spildoran is our River Friendly program coordinator. So as I mentioned, I am the StreamWatch program coordinator. StreamWatch is our volunteer water quality monitoring program, which started in 1992. It began with four overall goals: to characterize water quality throughout central New Jersey, to involve community members and facilitate a sense of ownership over their local environments, to motivate the public to initiate change in the use of the land and drainage systems that will enhance water quality by giving them the skills, confidence, and agency by participating in the program. And finally, to provide this water quality data to decision makers and to help local governments comply with things like their MS4 permits, et cetera. StreamWatch is a program made up of three separate teams. We call them action teams. Our first team began in 1992 with the start of the program as our chemical team, and they provide kind of a chemical snapshot of the water quality. Our volunteers use handheld meters or wet chemistry kits and go out into the field once a month to collect water samples from their sites and test for things like temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, nitrates, phosphates, chlorides, etc. We then have our biological team, which started in, I believe it was 1997. They go out once a year in the spring to collect macroinvertebrates, which are organisms that live on the stream bottom. And we identify those organisms, and then based on their pollution tolerance levels can give us a larger, kind of a longer term snapshot of the health of the stream and the ecosystem around it. And finally, our bacterial team samples during the summer months and is more focused on human health. So that team is collecting water samples which are analyzed for E. coli and harmful algal blooms, and we publish that data weekly to facilitate decisions about recreating in our water throughout the state. Okay, so this next slide here is showing just a general map of the area that our Streamwatch volunteers cover. So as you can see, we're focused in central New Jersey in that Millstone, Stony Brook, Millstone, and lower Delaware watershed. We have between 116 to 150 sites across this region. All right, so next we'll dig into like why we do our water quality monitoring. So from a regulatory perspective, we're looking to protect and restore specific uses. So we're looking for ideal conditions for, is the water swimmable? Are we able to recreate within that water? Is it safe? Is it safe to drink? Are we able to consume the organisms that live in the water? So fish and shellfish. And then is the water also supporting a healthy ecosystem? And that is measured through aquatic life. So we're looking for these ideal conditions for these. And then we're also looking to identify why there might be impairments. So our testing can help to identify pollutant sources across our watershed. In general, doing this kind of monitoring helps us to understand things like natural variability. So obviously we have changes in seasons, and so collecting this baseline data helps us to establish what is normal for this seasonal variability and identify any long-term trends that might be happening. It also helps us to measure changes in ecological health and determine impacts caused by humans. When we have that data, we are able to then predict and model future conditions. We can identify places that need work to repair the sources of pollution. We can protect human health and safety as we do through our bacterial team. And we can also support watershed management and policy decisions and actions, advocate for behavior change, and also fulfill regulatory monitoring requirements, both locally through municipal governments, statewide through DEP, and also through the EPA Clean Water Act. So let's take a look at some examples of these baseline data and what they show us. The first and easiest to kind of wrap your head around is temperature. Here we have a plot of temperature data collected by Streamwatch volunteers going back to 1992. This only goes up to 2022. But we can see that natural variability that we're talking about. So obviously we're seeing warmer temperatures in the summers and lower temperatures in the winters. And we can see that is pretty regular over the last 30 or so years. We can also detect long-term trends. So if we're seeing increasing nutrients, we can highlight or identify water bodies that might be heading towards eutrophication. We can also monitor things like erosion by looking at increasing turbidity trends. This graph here is showing averages of temperatures by month, again from 1992 to 2022. And what this is showing is December, January, February, March, and then June, July, August, and September, and the averages across the years for each of those months. And what we're seeing is a general increase in the summer months, but almost more importantly, we're seeing some slight increases in those barrier months of February, which is the blue line on the bottom, and March, which is that pink or fuchsia line on the bottom as well. So we're seeing some steep inclines in those kind of transitional months. And we do see the impacts of that both in like fish migration patterns as well as plant growth and things like that. So we're starting to see those shifts, and we can kind of identify that through some of these trends. Monitoring can also serve as an early warning system for ecosystem health. So in this picture, we've got a confluence of two water sources. From the top, that clear water is coming off of a natural meadow, and on the bottom, that more turbid water or cloudier water is coming off of a agricultural field. And so by monitoring the water that's coming from both of those, we can kind of identify, increased nutrients that are coming off the agriculture that might cause issues for the ecosystem. Having boots on the grounds via our volunteers also allows us to monitor things like the increasing occurrence of harmful algal blooms across the state. But this is also a trend across the country, so we're matching that. And we can also point out specific instances. So here we have a graph of turbidity, and we can that one of our volunteers collected and notified, so we've got some severe peaks here. And we'll talk a little bit more about this specific example at the end, but it's just kind of an early warning system to let us know, hey, something's going on here. Okay, so we have our volunteers go out and collect data, but we need to have something to compare the data to be able to understand what it means and how it's relevant. So that's where we use our assessments and standards. The government, New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, provides water quality standards throughout the state. It's a subjective term. Again, we're looking at kind of what the water is used for. And so they provide both numerical and narrative criteria based on the different types of water. In particular, they have trout production waters, a category of trout production waters where trout are able to reproduce, trout maintenance waters where they're just able to live, and non-trout waters. And you can see here that the standards for each of those types of water is a little bit different with regard to temperature. There are also occasionally some narrative criteria. So in place of having a specific metric like 2 milligrams of nitrate, we have a sentence that says something like concentrations that render the water unsuitable. So we take these standards, and where there aren't standards or where there are narrative standards, we'll look into research and other regulatory agencies nearby, Pennsylvania, Delaware, et cetera, and come up with our kind of assessment framework. This next slide is just a snapshot of the water quality standards that we use. The waters in the area that we cover are generally non-trout waters, so we're using those standards from DEP. And again, we will share these slides, so this is just an overview for you to have. This next slide is a brief overview of our assessment framework that we use to create that report card. You can scan this QR code to look at the document that explains all of this, but essentially we're rating each site on an excellent, good, fair, or poor basis by parameter. And so each parameter has its own specific metric, and we're going to go into those now. So our volunteers go out and collect the data, and then we have to do something with it to be able to compare across sites, across watersheds, and across parameters. So we do take that data and we turn it into our scores. For the purpose of our clean water report cards, we take the last 5 years of data. So our most recent report card, published in April of this year, has data from January 2020 through December 2024. Each site, in order to be scored, must have at least 8 measurements for each parameter. So it has to have at least 8 temperature measurements to be scored for temperature. The only exception to that is for macroinvertebrates, because that is a better long-term snapshot of the health, and because it is a little bit more labor intensive to get out there and do these assessments, we will score a site for a single macroinvertebrate sample. The scoring protocol, if you scan the QR code before and look at the document, you'll see that the scoring protocol does account for both methodology. So we do have a couple of different methodologies that we use for different parameters. So it accounts for that, and it also accounts for habitat type. So in some cases, we're looking at stream versus lakes. In some cases, we're looking at kind of the underlying geology, high gradient versus low gradient, et cetera. So the sites are scored for each parameter. And then we calculate an overall score for that site by averaging the parameters that have been scored. And so each parameter is scored on an excellent, good, fair, poor basis, and then we assign these numbers. So 4 is an excellent, 3 is good, 2 is fair, and 1 is poor, and then we use those to continue our calculations. So this is a good thing to keep in mind as we go throughout the rest of the presentation. 4 is excellent, 3 is good, 2 is fair, and 1 is poor. And another important thing to keep in mind here is that in general, we've got 4 and 3 are considered attaining, and 1 and 2 are considered non-attaining or impaired waters for that parameter. So if you want to think of it as a pass-fail type of thing. And so attaining and non-attaining are kind of the official jargon. And when we talk about attaining and non-attaining, we're talking about those uses that we mentioned before. So is it swimmable? Is it drinkable? Is it fishable? And is the aquatic life thriving? So just to give you some a little bit clearer examples of how this works, let's take a look again at temperature. So the scoring framework for temperature is as follows. For a site to score excellent, we have to have no samples that are above 28 degrees Celsius. A site can be good if there are no samples at 31 degrees or greater. A site is fair if there are 1 to 2 samples at 31 degrees or greater, and it is considered poor if there are 3 or more samples at 31 degrees or greater. And so when we plot the data, I've included the data from the previous report card as well, because we'll do some comparison. So this data is going from January 2019 to December 2024. The yellow line is showing that 28 degree threshold, and the red line is showing that 31 degree threshold. And so we can see the number of times we've got samples that are above those thresholds. And we can also see that that number is increasing as time goes on, the number of times it exceeds those thresholds. So we can expect to see some decreases in general of the scores for temperature. And as we know, temperature is very closely linked to dissolved oxygen. So we'll look at that next. Dissolved oxygen has a similar framework with, an excellent site being no samples below 5 milligrams per liter. 1 sample at or below 5 is considered good. 2 samples at 5 is poor. And if we have even 1 sample below 4 milligrams per liter, that is considered poor. So again, we'll plot that on the same type of graph going from January 2019 to December 2024. The yellow line is showing that 5 milligram barrier or threshold, and the red line is the 4 milligram threshold. And again, we see that we do have some exceedances and some increasing exceedances over time. When we look at that compared to the sampling effort, we can see that increase again. So this graph is just showing the number of total samples on the vertical axis there and time across the bottom. And the red is showing samples, the number of samples that have exceeded those thresholds. So just comparative to like sampling effort, we are still seeing that increase. So those are 2 of the like more basic kind of assessments, but then sometimes they get a little bit more complicated. So E. coli is an example of that. We have the first threshold, right? The simple threshold is no samples greater than 320 colonies. But then we also have this geometric mean threshold. And so for that, we have to have at least 5 samples within a 90-day period in order to calculate that geometric mean. And we want that geometric mean to stay below 100 colonies. So here we have the data that's been collected over the past 6 years. You can see, again, the bacteria team only samples in the summer. So that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing summer 2019. COVID happened, so we didn't have sampling in 2020. Summer 21, summer 22, summer 23, et cetera. And we can see that we have quite a few exceedances over that 320 colonies. The reason for the geometric mean metric is so that if we miss a peak in E. coli, that baseline is still, if it's above 100 colonies, it's still considered unsafe. So because this is more tied to human health, we have that kind of longer term metric as well as that 1 sample metric. And then even more complicated, we have our stream life or our macroinvertebrates. So again, our volunteers go out once a year in the spring and they collect samples of macroinvertebrates. These are organisms that live on the stream bed that do not have backbones or invertebrates. And they are categorized into different categories. So we have pollution sensitive organisms such as stoneflies and mayfly nymphs. We have pollution neutral organisms, damselflies and crayfish, and pollution tolerant organisms such as scuds and leeches. And what this means is, if there's an impairment in those waters, we're going to see less mayflies and stoneflies. And so what we're looking for as a team, as our biological action team, is for a combination of organisms from all three of these categories. We want to see that biological diversity happening in our streams. But if we do tend to see more pollution tolerant organisms, that can be an indicator that there have been some events that have decreased the water quality. So this in particular is complicated because it does have to, different organisms are going to live in different habitats. And so we have to adjust for our habitat types. This little inset of New Jersey is showing some of our geology, and we can see kind of the coastal plain on the right south side and Piedmont and highlands in the northern side of the state. And so we calculate our indices of bugs based on these regions. So HGMI is our high gradient or Piedmont area metric, and then CPMI is our coastal plain metric. And so we're calculating our indices based on where the sites are located and the composition of bugs and their pollution tolerance levels. We also then have different indices based on the specificity of identification. So when our volunteers identify the bugs themselves, we're only going down to a family level of taxonomy. But when we have our samples identified by a certified lab, we can get down to genus and sometimes even species level. So depending on what level we're able to get to for our analysis, we will score the sites based in this order. So if we have a genus level index, we'll use that to score the site, and else we'll go to the family size. So I encourage you to take a look at that assessment framework document and dig into it a little bit more. They can be a little bit complicated. We score each site on these different parameters, and then we need to roll them up to do some regional assessments. So in order to do that, we take the geometric mean of the total scores of the sites within a region. So we do this for municipalities and for subwatersheds. And we're using the geometric mean because it kind of de-emphasizes or minimizes the impact of any outliers. In order for a site to contribute to a score for a region, it needs to be scored for more than one parameter, unless that parameter is macroinvertebrates. And again, that's just because it's a better long-term snapshot of the water quality, but also the labor involved in collecting those samples is a little bit higher than the others. And because we're doing this on a regional basis, there are sometimes sites that contribute to multiple regions. So if there is a site that is on the border between two municipalities, it can contribute to both municipalities. Because we're doing the geometric mean, the numbers shift a little bit. So in this case, excellent is anything above a 3.25, and poor is anything below a 1.75. And then 2.5 is that attaining, non-attaining threshold in this case. So just as a quick example, I have here a screenshot of the Lower Stony Brook watershed, and you can see that it's colored orange because it scored fair overall. And in order to calculate that score, we've included the scores for SB1, which was also fair, HO1, which was actually good, and HL2, which was poor. And when we calculate the the geo mean of those sites and the other ones that I haven't pointed out here, the entire watershed becomes fair. So that's generally how we score our sites and our regions, which again include municipalities and subwatersheds. Before we get into the specific data and the trends that we're seeing, I wanted to do a quick run through of the report card itself and how to navigate it. So if you scan this QR code here, you can follow along, but I am just going to switch sharing my screen to my browser so I can show you what that looks like. Just a moment. All right, are you able to see that maybe?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this is our Clean Water Report Card from 2024. Again, this is covering data from January 2020 through December 2024 and was published in April of this year. It was updated just recently. It is available on our website and again through the QR code that I shared before and will be available in the slides that we share. So just a quick navigation of this. If you scroll down, you'll see this navigation bar here. This is some shortcuts that can take you to specific areas of the report card. Are you able to see my mouse as I do this?
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right, we start off with a quick introduction of StreamWatch, what it is, the 3 different teams and how they sample. This map here is showing our sampling locations, and you can click on a site to get some more information about that site. We'll have a pop-up that comes up with the scores for each parameter, the overall score at the top here, the scores for each parameter, and then some information about the site as well as our monitoring activity. If you continue scrolling, you get some quick instructions and a link to that assessment framework that we just went over. As you scroll through, you'll see maps like these, and they have the score. Again, green is excellent, good is yellow, orange is fair, and red is poor. So you keep that in mind as you go through. When you get to these maps, there are occasionally these arrows on the side, so you can click through to see other maps. So the previous one was the sub-watershed overall scores, and this is the municipal overall scores. You can scroll through the different sections. So we have physical parameters like water temperature and turbidity, and you can click on these links to take you to those maps as well. The way these maps are structured, we have a quick introduction to the parameter that's being shown and why it matters. Then we start with a map of the overall site scores for that parameter, followed by, if you click that right arrow, sub-watersheds, and then municipalities. And that is the same across all of the different parameters. So I encourage you to take some time to look through this, find your location, and learn a little bit more about your local water quality. Okay, I'm going to switch back to my presentation now. Just bear with me one moment. We see that?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, all right, so now we're going to dig into the data, and this is pretty technical. This is a technical Friday after all, so bear with me as I go through a lot of graphs. All right, so we'll start off by taking a look at the overall scores for the individual sites. Again, green is excellent, yellow is good, orange is fair, red is poor, and then if we have gray sites, that just means that there is not enough data or insufficient data. So we're looking here at 116 sites, and this is the overall distribution of the sites. You can see here that we've only got 5 sites that scored as excellent overall, and most of our sites are falling into that fair category, with 58 sites in that fair category. When we look at the average scores across the different parameters, we can see that we're doing pretty well in some areas. Temperature, turbidity, nitrate are all actually doing pretty well. We want to keep in mind that that 2 line is our attaining, non-attaining threshold. So if we look at that, we're seeing that our problem areas, the areas where we're non-attaining across, just generally across the board, are going to be dissolved oxygen, phosphate, chloride, and E. coli. So this is our first metric, right? We look at the sites individually, and then we look into the sub-watersheds. So we'll take a look at that. Here we're scoring 31 sub-watersheds overall, and you can see that none of them have scored excellent. And most of them, again, are falling into that fair category. When we look at the breakdown of the different parameters, we again see that same pattern of DO, phosphate, chloride, and E. coli are still non-attaining, or, if we're thinking pass fail, are failing. Looking again at the municipal scores, we've got a similar pattern happening here. We're looking at 26 municipalities overall. None have scored excellent. 7 have scored poor, but most of them are falling into that fair category. And again, when we look by parameter, we see that same pattern of dissolved oxygen, phosphates, chloride, and E. coli are not attaining. So I wanted to take a quick look to see how different our scores are between 2023 and 2024. So again, our report cards are done with a 5-year, 5 years of data. So the difference between these sites is 2019 and 2024. For the 2023 report card scores, 2019 is included, and it ends in 2023. For the 2024 report cards, we start in January 2020. So we're just dropping off that 2019, but adding on 2024. So for these two graphs, we're going to do some side-by-side comparison. We have the number of sites being scored along the vertical axes and then the different parameters across the bottom. We'll go by kind of category. So we'll start off with the excellence. And we can see here that the pattern is roughly the same across both scores, but we do have a slight decrease in the number of temperature sites that have scored excellent, and the number of sites that have scored excellent for temperature. But in general, the rest of them are actually increased a little bit from 2023 to 2024. We're seeing similar patterns here with the sites that scored good, slight increases across the board, but the pattern remains the same. Again, with the fair, we see that. And poor as well. This one's a little bit more drastic. We see some steep decreases in the number of sites that scored poor for chloride and E. coli, which matches with our, sorry, never mind. Finally, I've got here the sites without data, and really the main takeaway from this graph, I think, is the increase in sampling effort that we've had in that past year in 2024. So you can see the bars for the gray or the insufficient data have decreased across the board. But again, those patterns are still the same. When we look at the average parameter shifts, so what we're doing here is looking at the difference between the 2023 and 2024 report cards per parameter, and the difference in the averages. First of all, right off the bat, we can see that if there is any change, it is negative. So that means a decreasing score. That means decreasing water quality. The one highlight here is that nitrate has no change. So that's a good thing. But we do see DO and E. coli and even temperature having kind of the most decrease. And so those are areas of concern. So let's take a look at how these shifts have played out across the regions. We'll start off with the subwatersheds. This map is looking at the change in overall score for subwatersheds. We have the darker green being the most positive change and the darker red being the most decline. But you do want to pay attention to the scale here. We're looking at a change in score of a 0.12 down to a negative 0.16. So these are really small changes. And when we look at the averages across the parameters, we do see slight increases in nitrogen, phosphorus, and chloride scores. The rest are declining. And again, we see that dissolved oxygen is a bit of a problem area with the steepest decline. I did want to take a moment to point out both the top 5 improving subwatersheds and the top 5 declining subwatersheds. And so those are listed here. Hopefully we've got some representatives from some of these, and hopefully yours are in the improving category, but you never know. But so one thing that I want to point out here is that the scores are composites of all of the different parameters. So you do want to really drill down, even though Rockbrook has a steep increase. When we look at the overall scores, we see, actually Rockbrook is a good example. It's got some increases in several parameters. But for example, Upper Crosswicks Creek, which had the highest or like the most decline for a subwatershed, we can see that that was only scored or only had a change in score for dissolved oxygen, and that was pretty dramatic. And so we know that that one parameter is driving the change for that whole subwatershed. So it's important to like drill down and actually take a look at the specific parameters to figure out what's going on in each of these areas. Similarly, for municipal shifts, similar map here, we're looking at the overall changes in municipalities. Municipalities are a little bit trickier because they can have multiple watersheds within them. And so this is helpful for like a government perspective, but naturally speaking, like the watersheds need to be managed separately, right? So that can be a little bit tricky. But anyways, in this map, we're looking at the overall change. Again, the darker the green is, that means more of an increase in score. And the darker the red is, it's more of a decrease in score. And we do see that this range is a little bit bigger. So we're seeing increases of 0.25 and decreases of 0.2. When we look again at the parameter averages, however, we see the similar patterns here. So increases in score for nitrate, chloride, and phosphate. Everything else is decreasing. And again, we see dissolved oxygen is the steepest decrease. Highlighting again the top 5 improvers and the top 5 decliners. We do again want to drill down into those. So for example, here again, Pennington Borough has the steepest decline, but that was only here with the macroinvertebrates. So that's driving the score for that entire area. And East Amwell is the similar situation here where temperature score increased quite a bit. So that's driving that. So just to illustrate this point a little bit more, I wanted to jump into some of those examples. So Rockbrook was our sub-watershed with the highest change. So again, this map is showing the overall change, not the overall score. So it's had the highest increase in score. We can see here that there are 2 sites contributing to that score, or potentially. We have RK1 and SYNL1. If you're going through the report card, you can click on these sites to see their pop-ups, and I've got those here. We can see for RK1, the reason it's got an X is because there was insufficient data to calculate a change in score. SYNL, on the other hand, overall rose by 0.13, but sorry, that shouldn't have happened. By 0.13, but when we look at the breakdown in the different parameters, we actually see that most of them have not changed and that there was a decrease by a whole point for temperature. So how is that possible that a site has such a steep decrease in one parameter, no change across the other, but in general, the watershed is a positive, has positive change? So the first reason is that Rockbrook did not have enough data to be scored in the last report card. So there are no scores for the 2023 report card, which means that any scores that we've collected for 2024 are going to automatically kind of bump that up a little bit. And we can see for the parameters for Rockbrook scored in 2024 that most of them are attaining. Our only ones that are non-attaining are dissolved oxygen and phosphate. When we look at the scores for SYNL1, Sylvan Lake, we see that it was only scored for temperature, turbidity, nitrate, phosphate, chloride, and E. coli in the previous report card. But for this report card, we were able to score it for pH and dissolved oxygen as well. And so although we can't calculate the change in score because there was no score, it does bump that up. So even though we're seeing a decrease in temperature, the addition of RK1 and the addition of those 2 parameters for SYNL1 have bumped up the score enough to cause that big leap in the score for this subwatershed overall. So I just give this example to illustrate that it's important to kind of drill down into what the change is actually showing and to look into those parameters specifically to see what's going on. So this is a second example on the opposite end of the spectrum. Pennington was our municipality with the largest decrease in score, in overall score. And similar to Rockbrook, there are only 2 Streamwatch sites within this municipality. And again, one of those sites has insufficient data to be scored or to calculate the change in score. The second site, SB4, only had enough data to calculate the score for 1 parameter, which is macroinvertebrates, and that parameter decreased. I don't know if you can read that. It's here in the pop-up, the screenshot of the pop-up, but I do encourage you to check out the report cards yourselves. So looking into this a little bit further, SB4B was actually not scored in either year. So there's not enough data to score for that site. SB4 was scored in the previous report card, but is no longer an active site. And so those scores have kind of dropped off of the report card. The only parameter that was scored for this recent report card was the macros, and that did show a decline in score. And so we're seeing that one parameter and that one site driving the score for the entire municipality. Okay, so what's next here? Oh, and just to reemphasize here that in the previous year's score, the macroinvertebrates were above that attaining threshold, and now they're just at that threshold. So that's a significant decline. So to try to get kind of a better idea of what's going on, I wanted to look at the sites that were scored for all of the parameters across both report cards. So these are, I think, 11. I haven't actually counted how many sites there are, but 11 or so sites that have been scored both in the 2023 and 2024 report cards. In the map on the right here, you can see that they're pretty spread out throughout our area. So we're not looking kind of regionally. They're a pretty good subset. And I wanted to emphasize here that most, like a good number of these, maybe half of them, are showing no change in score between the 2 years. So those are the ones that I've highlighted there. And when we drop those down and take a look at the ones that did have changes in score, we're seeing the 2023 scores in gray and the 2024 scores in blue. And we're seeing declines for any site that was scored for all parameters in both years that did show a change. That change was negative, so a decrease in overall water quality. And again, we want to drill down and see what's going on. So when we look at those sites individually, we see that we actually did have a slight increase in macroinvertebrates for one of these sites. I think it was maybe R01A. But that is kind of offset by this really steep decline in dissolved oxygen. And so that's driving the overall dip in score for that site. But again, we're seeing that if there was a change, it was negative, and so a decrease in water quality. Okay, so that's kind of how the report card is set up. That's how the scores work and the regional scores work. And now I want to get into a little bit of how our data fits into the context of our 30 years of data or 30 plus years of data. So again, starting with temperature, this graph on the top left is the same graph that we looked at before, showing the exceedances and those thresholds of 28 and 31 degrees and the exceedances over the past 6 years. The graph just below that is showing the number of samples that exceeded those thresholds compared to the number of total samples we collected. And you can see that increasing over time as well. I threw up some trend lines, and you can see that the trend for the temperature over the past 6 years is increasing. That's that dotted black line here. And when I plotted our whole data set, right, from 1992 to December 2024, and threw up a trend line, I did also see a pretty steep incline. So this is showing that the report card, the data used for the report card, does fit with the trends that we're seeing overall. And again, because dissolved oxygen and temperature are so linked, we're going to take a look at that next. This is the same graph and exceedance chart that we saw before on the left. And we see the number of exceedances increasing over time. I did not throw up a trend line on this one, but when we look at the overall trend across the past 30 plus years, we see a slight decline in dissolved oxygen, which is consistent with it kind of dropping in score across the board, which we saw before. pH is another area of concern, and this is one that has actually been flagged anecdotally by a lot of our volunteers on the ground. They themselves have noticed increases in pH, exceedances across the board. So pH is scored within this range. So the plot on the left here is showing pH over time. The thresholds for pH are 6.5 and 8.5. So those are our metrics. We want our excellent waters to stay within that range between 6.5 and 8.5. If it's going above 8.5 or below 6.5, then we start to see decreases in scores. And again, over time, we're seeing that the number of times that we collect data that is above or below those thresholds is increasing over time. And that is what's shown here on the right-hand graph as well. This is the percentage of samples that have exceeded those thresholds over the past 30-some years. And we can see that that is a pretty steep incline in the number of times we've got pH outside of that range. Turbidity has a lower threshold of 50 nephelometric turbidity units. Again, we see, so that's what that red line is on the graph on the top left. We see some increases in that over time. And again, on the exceedance plot just below that, we see those red bars starting to show up in the last couple of years. This one was interesting when I went back and looked at the maps. There does seem to be some regionality with the turbidity scores and the kind of turbidity impairments. And so this kind of is a good example of what kind of issues will show up in our data and elicit further investigation and makes us ask some questions. What's going on in the Hopewell, Stony Brook watersheds and municipalities, and are there development projects going on that are spiking the turbidity but may potentially improve after a while if they're development of stormwater retention systems or something like that. So this is just an example of like issues that can be shown through our data and places where we can do some more investigation. I wanted to take a look at the nutrients. On the left, we have nitrate, and on the right, we have phosphate. We'll take a look at the nitrate first. There is no standard for nitrate via, New Jersey DEP. So what we use is, oh goodness, I'm blanking on it. I want to say 10. Is it 10? I don't know. Sorry, I'm blanking on that one. But we do have some exceedances of the metric that we've put in place, but they're pretty straight across the board. There's not a clear trend in the number of exceedances for nitrate. And that again is reflected in the scores that we saw earlier, where nitrate had either the least negative change or no change across the sites and regions that we measured. Phosphate is a slightly different story. We've got phosphate exceedance. The standard for phosphate is 0.1 milligram per liter. That's the red line in the top graph there. And we see that the number of exceedances was like 100% early on, right? But it's starting to decrease. And this actually has more to do with methodology, and I'll talk about that more in a bit. But so what I'm showing here is that we're actually getting a better picture of what phosphate is doing now than we were before. And so we're kind of building a new baseline for what phosphate is normally like. And we can't necessarily look to the past. So this isn't reflective of improvement in phosphate. It's more reflective of our changes in methodology. When we look at the macroinvertebrates, these are the different indices and the scores that we've calculated across time. And the general thing that I wanted to point out here is that, back in 1996, as we can see in this NJIS plot, and in the early 2000s over here, we do see that we had a couple of sites that scored excellent for macroinvertebrates, but that's not happening anymore. So we do see a decrease in macroinvertebrate scores in all four indices across the board. And that is actually fits in line with what NJDEP has reported in their most recent integrated report. This map on the right is showing the state of New Jersey and the different water subwatersheds. And the orange ones are considered non-attaining or non-supporting for aquatic life. So we can see most of the state falls into that category and is non-attaining for aquatic life. Chloride is one of the newest parameters that we've started to measure it just within the past 4 years or so. And so you can see there's some spottiness in our data collection. We started off doing it just over the summers. This summer, summer 2022 was particularly droughty. And so we see increases in chloride concentration where there's been a lot of evaporation and concentration of the chloride in the waters. And then we start doing some monthly chloride sampling. And we do see a spike here in the winter. And we do see like exceedances over that freshwater threshold throughout the time that we've done sampling. And that does, again, fit in with DEP's data, which has shown that chloride has tripled since 1997 in New Jersey freshwaters. So our data does match that. So the overall kind of story here is trending towards mediocrity. So on this plot here, I've got the 2023 scores on the vertical axis. So excellent sites are scoring a 4 up here. And these are individual sites that I've plotted. So excellent, good, fair, poor. This 2.5 line is that attaining, non-attaining threshold. And when we look, and then, across the bottom axis here, we have the change in score from 2023 to 2024. So which direction, improving or not improving. 0 is here in the middle. So all the dots on this 0 line have seen no change in score between the 2 report cards. And what we're seeing is that most of the sites that were good are declining. So we've got 21 sites in that top left quadrant that are good, scored good, but have declined in score a little bit between the 2 years, the 2 report cards. We also see a fair number of poor sites that are also still declining. We have very few good sites that are improving in this upper right-hand quadrant, only 7, and about 12 sites in the poor section that are actually improving. So in general, we're trending towards this kind of middle of the road. I did want to point out that we had about 14 sites that did score good and had no change between the 2 report cards, but 23 poor sites or non-attaining sites that didn't change either. And when I looked at the reports from DEP and USGS, we see very similar trends. So we see nitrates, total dissolved solids, which can be related to turbidity, and chloride showing increasing concentrations. And we see the macros trending towards that good or fair, those kind of middle of the road. We don't have as many excellent or as many poor. So we're kind of trending towards the middle. So I know we're getting close on time here, so I've just got a couple of caveats to the data that I wanted to address, some places for further investigation and some places to kind of question our data a little bit. So the first example I wanted to give is kind of the difference between upstream and downstream impacts. So this is a map showing the overall score of the Shabakunk subwatershed. And I wanted to point out here that up towards the headwaters, we have a site here, SC3, that it's actually scored excellent for that site. And when I pull up a picture of that site, we can see this is what a naturally excellent high gradient stream will look like. We've got some good tree cover, we've got a decent amount of water, we've got a good riparian buffer, etc. In the middle of the watershed here, where we have the sites SC4 and SC1, pull up a picture of one of those sites, we can see some evidence of erosion, less tree cover, less of a riparian buffer, the diversity of the plants in the riparian buffer are a little bit less. So we can already see some of that habitat degradation just visually. And finally, when we get down to the bottom of the watershed, when we get down to SC2 there, this is a much more urban site, and it actually happens to be right off of Lawrence Shopping Center, and the bridge crossing the stream right there is Route 1, US Route 1. So this is showing up in the wooded areas where it's more naturalized, we're obviously going to get better water quality, but as water flows through a watershed, it's going to kind of gather impairments and end up being kind of more impaired downstream. And so this is an area where I would like to do some more investigation and look into kind of comparing headwater sites against pour point sites and see if we're seeing any changes there. I did want to pull up just the sites here so we can see that these upstream sites, SC3, scored pretty well across the board except for phosphate. The middle sites are a little bit more mixed, and then as we get further downstream, we can see the change in water quality in those scores. So that's another area for more questions and more analysis, is like those upstream versus downstream impacts. I also wanted to point out here that this subwatershed, the Shabakunk subwatershed, crosses into 3 different municipalities. So managing a watershed like this is going to be a collaborative effort and is going to require collaboration between Hopewell, Lawrence, Ewing, and possibly even Trenton, as this water then flows into the Assunpink Creek and then goes into Trenton. So more on that later. Another thing that we can look at is land use. So when you are scrolling through the report card and you click on one of the pop-ups for one of our regions, you'll get a pie chart that has the distribution of land use. And when I pulled up the land use pie charts for the sites that, the subwatersheds that were good, we see a pretty significant portion of forested land there. And when I compare that to the subwatersheds that scored poor, we see a lot more urban land use in those watersheds. So that's probably affecting the water quality there, as we know. And this is just a quick graphic that is showing kind of the urban sprawl that's been happening in New Jersey. It only goes up to 2015, so we can imagine that it's even more. But the gray area is urban as of 1986, and then the red that increases as the graphic goes on is that urban sprawl, or the increase of urban land use. So we can see that that's been pretty significant up through 2015, and is probably continued in the past 10 years. So that's another area to look into a little bit more, the land use. I wanted to point out some caveats in our analysis. So phosphate, as I was mentioning before, we're seeing kind of a decrease in the number of exceedances over time. When I plotted phosphate over time from 1992 to 2024, you can really see that our methodology up until 2021-ish, 2020, 2021, was really limiting, right? We were only able to score down to a 0.2. The threshold for phosphate, again, is 0.1, so we're not even able to measure down to that threshold. And we're only able to measure in very specific increments, so 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, et cetera. With the implementation of some new methodologies, you can see that we are able to score down below that 0.2 threshold. And so we're seeing kind of a decrease in the number of exceedances because we can actually measure them. And so that is with the use of our handheld meters on the left there and our Gallery discrete analyzer on the right. We're able to get more precise specific data. And then, of course, because we're a volunteer program and volunteers are doing our data collection, we do have some just limitations as far as their availability, both location-wise and time-wise. We occasionally have issues with being able to access a site. Sometimes it's blocked by construction. Sometimes the pond freezes over and you just can't get your meter into the water or collect a water sample, and then we're not able to collect that data. This is, again, the example of chloride. So chloride is our newest parameter that we've added on. You can see the gap here is the reagents that we needed to do the analysis in our lab were back ordered. And so we just weren't able to do that analysis that year, unfortunately. And then we started off doing the analysis for chloride in the summer months when it tends to be a little bit lower, right? We expect peaks in the winter when we're doing road salt, and we do see that here in January. But when I threw a trend line up on here, it's actually showing a decline in chloride concentrations, which we know is not doesn't match what we're seeing in general. So this is another place for further research, and we will be doing some comparative studies beginning this winter to compare different methodologies and to increase the amount of data that we're collecting for chloride. So going back to kind of how our science department works, we collect this data, our volunteers collect this data, and we to turn it into information. Is it showing good water quality or bad water quality? We then try to put that into action. So we either put into place actions to protect clean water or to fix impaired waters, and hopefully the goal being to end up with a clean water that is protected. There's a couple ways that we have done that historically. The first example here is more about safety and helping people to know when it's safe to interact with the water and to recreate. We have partnered with Petty Lake and Heightstown triathlon for several years to help them determine whether or not it's safe to practice and actually do the triathlon in their lake in town there. And so we were able to kind of plot the E. coli concentrations over time and say, hey, you probably shouldn't run it if it's above this, 100 colonies, but definitely don't if it's above that 230 line. We've also had the opportunity to adjust some, to pinpoint some areas of problems and fix them. So we had a volunteer years ago who sent us this picture of her site on Cruiser Brook and said, hey, the turbidity that I'm reading, you'll recognize this graph from earlier, I'm seeing some peaks in turbidity and it doesn't look right? This is not what a stream should look like. So we were able to investigate that a little bit more and find out that a quarry upstream was operating on expired permits, and we were able to work with that quarry and the local government to update their permits and fix that turbidity problem for a while at least. Our data can also be used to show the impacts of changes in regulations. So in the early 2000s, there was a stormwater management rule put in place. And then in about 2011, we had some fertilizer regulations. And a science fellow of ours, Matthew Heinley, was able to kind of see some of the impacts of those changes in our data. And so that's another use of our data to see if the regulations that we've put in place are actually effective in improving water quality. And last but not least, our policy department works with regions on these watershed improvement plans. The plans are put in place to reduce water pollution and flooding, and they can either be done in like a town by town or a watershed based. But as I mentioned before, working in a municipal frame of mind is a little bit tricky because there can be multiple sub-watersheds there. And as we saw with the upstream, downstream impacts, the water that you're getting at the lower end of your municipality might not be coming from your municipality. So it's important for those groups and neighboring towns to work together to manage the water within a watershed together. And it's just more effective, less redundant work happening. And so our policy department has been working on that and has 4 regional watershed improvement plans in place right now. We've got the Stony Brook, Lower Millstone, Assunpink, and Upper Millstone work groups in place. I know Assunpink and Stony Brook have been working on it for a while, and I believe the Upper Millstone is our newest one, so we're still working on getting that kind of off the ground. But another way that our data can be used is to highlight areas where these groups might want to focus their efforts. Okay, so I think that kind of wraps up my data stuff. I do want to just finish up by saying there's lots of ways for you to get involved with the Watershed Institute as a whole and what we do. We always encourage you to come visit the center, walk our trails, check out our ADA accessible boardwalk. Is one of my personal favorite things about this place. We also have lots of events throughout the year. Our conference is coming up in February. Check out our website for more information on that. We do stream cleanups across different municipalities in April, Solstice Run in June, and other events throughout the year. And then, of course, we have lots of opportunities to volunteer. So I encourage you to scan this QR code, visit our volunteer page, and see if there's a way that you would like to contribute and participate in what we do here. And of course, we're always looking for people for the Streamwatch team, particularly the biological action team. So if you're interested in learning more about the bugs and getting out into the field, please reach out via our volunteer webpage. That's all I've got for you today, but I think we can open it up to some questions. Here is my contact information. And again, we will share this recording and the slides with you. But let's, I guess, go ahead and take some questions. I'll stop sharing my screen.
All right, Gian, thank you very much. We have one question so far. There's been several that have been answered during the conversation.
Okay.
But do DEP, USGS posit casual links for any of these parameters? Are agriculture or golf course land use tied to increased nitrogen phosphorus? Do we know how or where to focus efforts to resolve any of the exceedances?
So based on the data that I've looked at, we haven't been that specific. So in New Jersey, we use different tiers of data, right? We have tier 1 data is considered educational. That's what we use with our schools. Kids go out, collect data. It's just for informational purposes. Then we have tier 2 data, which most of our Streamwatch program falls under, and that's targeting. So what our data helps is to kind of pinpoint areas where we might want to look into additional things like that. So golf courses, agriculture, quarries, things like that, that might be affecting the water quality. We can look at that. And then there's also tier 3 data, which is used for regulatory purposes. And our biological data does fall into that category. And so DEP does use that for their reports. But yeah, so our data is not quite that specific just yet, but it kind of points to where we need to look further.
No, Steve, if you wanted to add anything to that before I give my non-science 2 cents.
No, I mean, I think that was good. I was actually gonna ask you your opinion on the efforts. Let's get the non-science opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Stroud Water Resource Center and others have done a number of studies over the years showing once a watershed hits about 10% impervious cover, watersheds tend to be impaired, and that 10% number probably is much lower. So it's probably 3, 4, 5% versus 10 before we hit the impairment. So as we urbanize our land, we will start to see more and more impairments. It would not surprise me if agriculture and golf courses are a bigger source of that nitrogen phosphorus. Golf courses, maybe not. I mean, because with the fertilizer law limited the use of nitrogen and almost eliminated the use of phosphorus. Hopefully we're not seeing as much from golf courses or lawns, but that could be also, I know there's a couple people looking into or have looked into, we have a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus stored into our land and into our streams because we've just discharged so much. So as stormwater discharges into our stream, erodes our stream banks, some of that sort of encapsulated nutrients are getting re-released. So that can be another source. And I will also say that as towns are developing those watershed improvement plans, we can start to identify some of those hot spots of where we can see a lot of pollution coming and then target projects to reverse those trends.
Yep.
So we still have a couple more minutes. If people want additional questions, pop them into the Q&A. Rob Becker, thank you very much for your questions. And Rob says, great presentation. So
Thank
good
you.
job, John. Yeah, give it another minute. And if there's no other questions, we'll give you an extra 5 minutes back in your day.
Hey. Just enough time to turn the PDFs or the slides into a PDF for you guys.
Yep, I think we're good. So, all right.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Have a good one.
And we will be sending out the slides and a link to the recording later, might be a week or two. We have our big fall fundraising fest on Saturday, so it may take a few extra days to get that out to you. But everyone, thank you for attending, and we'll see you at our next Technical Friday in the future. Thanks.